Hi everyone, Mr. P here with lesson 20 of our unit on the Black freedom struggle. This will be the first in a two-part lesson on Dr. King and Malcolm X. So this will be lesson 20.1 and the next video will be lesson 20.2. In both of these, in this overall lecture, we will focus on developing a comparative analysis of Dr. King and Malcolm X's views on America, white America in particular, Black liberation, and the methods to achieve liberation. I'll rely heavily on Black liberation theologist James Cones's book, Martin and Malcolm and America, A Dream or a Nightmare. These two videos on Dr. King and Malcolm X are designed to prepare you for our seminar analyzing Ella Baker, Dr. King, and Malcolm X all together. So check out lesson 19 for more on Ella Baker and her radical democratic vision for liberation. So let's get started. And I do want to just say that I'm going to have a lot of quoted material on these slides. I will not always read them in full. I'll reference them. I've did key pieces of the quotes from Dr. King and Malcolm X's speeches, so I highly recommend that you pause the video at various points to read the quotes in full before listening to my analysis. All right, so with that in mind, I want to give a quick background reminder on integrationism and separatism. There are two not mutually exclusive visions for liberation in the course of Black history in the United States. That of integrationism, think voting rights, think civil rights, desegregation, education, Brown v. Board, and then separatism. Think to some extent Black political power, a vision for moving back to Africa, a vision for a separate country with the new African independence movement, but also just a vision for not necessarily working together. So you can understand these two visions as either the goal or the means. So integrationism, the goal of might be civil rights, desegregation, voting rights, and the means would be like the NAACP accepting, money from white supporters and having white membership, right? That would be an integrationist means. Think of separatism, the goal, moving back to Africa, having a the Republic of New Africa here in the U.S. Those are separatist goals of living apart from white society, or they could be means. Black churches. Malcolm X's Organization for Afro-American Unity doesn't accept white membership or money from white organizations or white people. So that could also refer to a means. I also want to recall your attention to Du Bois's double consciousness theory, where he asks, what after all am I? Am I an American or am I a Negro? Can I be both? Integrationists tend to answer both, really blending those two identities. Think, Frederick Douglass recruiting Black fight in the Civil War. Separatist nationalists answer no. Think Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, emphasizing Blackness, African identity over American identity. All right, so with that in mind, keep this in mind and think about where Dr. King and Malcolm X are falling with respect to integrationist and separatist goals and methods. So this video will focus on their biographies, and then the next video will do an analysis of their quotes. But I am going to use quotes here to preface their biographies. So I want us to think about how each of their experiences and how they interpret their experiences really shape how they identify, how they view America, and how they envision liberation. So here Malcolm X says, I think that an objective reader may see how in society to which I was exposed as a Black youth here in America, for me to wind up in a prison was really just about inevitable. So we want to think, what was his experience that really shapes that outcome, but also some of his later views that we'll look at later. He also says, I'm Black first. I'm not interested in being American because America has never been interested in me. So we see very clearly here how he answers Du Bois's question, right? Not American, Black. And that's how he identifies. Very clearly with that sort of separatist push or thrust. Early biography: Malcolm X, born in Nebraska, son of a Baptist preacher, very different from Dr. King's father, who was a preacher. Malcolm X's father, Earl Little, was not a permanent pastor. Traveled from church to church. Earl Little was a Black nationalist. He was an organizer for Garvey's organization, who was a Pan-Africanist from Jamaica. This becomes really key in terms of shaping his early views on nationalism versus integrationism, because Malcolm X accompanied his father to those meetings. He also, his family was chased out of Omaha when he was a baby by the Ku Klux Klan. And then he was later, his house was found in Lansing, Michigan, I don't have here, by a white supremacist group known as the Black Legionnaires. And that's the group who he thinks killed his father, although the official ruling was accidental. He died on train tracks, and it's likely that group threw him on the tracks. His mom, after that, and after several years of kind of feeling humiliated by what Malcolm X describes as these white welfare workers, had a breakdown and was placed in a state hospital. Malcolm X ends up in a very integrated experience, integrated school. And as a result, he's exposed to white teachers, and his 8th grade teacher discouraged him from being a lawyer, referring to how, and uses the N-word and suggests carpentry because it's better suited to people like him is the belief of the teacher. So Malcolm X experiences racism very virulently, and it leads him to drop out. It's a turning point in his life. And he eventually ends up in Boston and Harlem, and he develops a cocaine habit and organizes a burglary ring to support that. It lands him in jail for several years, and he joins the Nation of Islam while in prison, and he became an avid reader and had a very strong moral grounding too. I want to talk about the Nation of Islam and why he joins and why he's why he's kind of forced out. So he joins really because the Nation of Islam defined the white man as the devil, and that made sense to Malcolm X, whose dad was killed by white hate group, who dropped out of school because of the racism he faced from white teachers. So this made sense to him, and it affirmed Black history and culture in a way that Malcolm X didn't really have. He talks about how his dad beat everyone else in his household except for him because he was the lightest skinned. And so he never really, was exposed to this kind of affirmation of Blackness. He was exposed to it to some extent with Marcus Garvey's United Negro Improvement Association, for sure, but not to the extent that he experiences it in the Nation of Islam. And he takes the last name X, getting rid of the last name Little, to represent his unknown African ancestors. Now, he does break from the Nation of Islam, is forced out officially. The reason is he's forced out because he criticized JFK after JFK's assassination, and that disobeyed Elijah Muhammad, the charismatic leader who Malcolm X adored for quite a while. But it's very clear that the break could not have been avoided. Malcolm was way too political. Muhammad was too religious, too hypocritical, did not want Malcolm X to take any political stances. And the other piece here that's really crucial is that Muhammad was sleeping around, and yet he preached against that. And Malcolm X saw that as quite hypocritical. And at this point, Malcolm X had developed a very strong moral stance. He was somebody who practiced what he preached, and could not stand folks who did not. Now, after breaking, he goes on a Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, travels throughout Africa, and he does stop calling white people the devil, acknowledging that white folks are not inherently evil because he's experienced white folks who got along with people of many other races in Mecca. Seeing white Muslims and Muslims of color worship together really changed his views on race. And he founds the Organization of Afro-American Unity on a program of restoration, reorientation, education, economic security, and self-defense, fighting for human rights for Black people. While it excludes white membership and doesn't accept money from white people, he acknowledges that white people need to educate one another, and he also is moving closer at this point in his life towards working with civil rights leaders in a way he hadn't before. Yet he is assassinated before he's able to meet with Dr. King to plan a more developed way of working together. They only met once, and it was at this time after Senate hearings on Civil Rights Act. I'm not going to actually go into depth on their assassinations. They were both assassinated at a young age of 39. Malcolm X in 1965 and Dr. King in 1968. I definitely encourage you to read more about those assassinations. I just don't have time in these videos. Moving on to Dr. King's biography. And preface it with this quote where he says, "It's quite easy for me to think of a God of love, mainly because I grew up in a family where love was central and where lovely relationships were ever present. Easy to think of a universe as basically friendly because of my uplifting hereditary and environmental circumstances, to lean towards optimism than pessimism about human nature, mainly because of my childhood experiences." So Dr. King acknowledges, right, that much of his views on liberation in America very much are shaped by his experience within the Christian church. And so let's move into his biography. Born in Atlanta, Georgia, in the South, son of not just a Baptist preacher, he and Malcolm X have a lot in common, but there's a key difference here. Malcolm X's dad was a traveling preacher who never had a permanent pastorate, whereas Dr. King, his father was a prominent, very well-known Baptist preacher at a very prestigious and well-respected Baptist church. His father was on the executive board of the NAACP, on the board of Morehouse College, a participant in the Negro Voter League. His dad fought for equalizing Black and white teacher salaries in Atlanta public schools. He has that background. And because, unlike Malcolm X, Dr. King lives in a very segregated society, whereas Malcolm X experienced a lot of integration, Dr. King isn't exposed to as many white folks early on as Malcolm X was. So at the age of 6, there is one experience where a white friend told him they couldn't play together because the term he used was colored. It's not the experiences of racism Dr. King talks about in his writing and autobiographies compared to Malcolm X's experience of racism are very different, right? Malcolm X, father killed by white hate group, the experience with the teacher, they're very different, and they do shape their identities very differently. Dr. King holds on to a kind of hope in white America that Malcolm X doesn't have in his writing and speeches. Dr. King attended very prestigious universities, colleges. Malcolm X didn't, was self-educated in prison. So very different experiences there. And Dr. King, of course, becomes leader in the bus boycott in Montgomery at a young age, leads SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and later on in his career develops a anti-capitalist, anti-war vision that we'll talk about in the next video. So check out the next video for Dr. King and Malcolm X's views on America, white America in particular, their views on Black liberation, their goals, and their methods to achieve that liberation. So come back for lesson 20.2. Ciao.